In June 2015 in Missouri, a 48-year-old woman was found brutally stabbed to death in her home. Her disabled, wheelchair-bound daughter was missing, and neighbours feared the worst. Their concern, however, turned to absolute disbelief after police quickly arrested two people. Not only was the missing teenager one of those under suspicion, but she was also able to walk. This is what happens when a mother's love isn't what it seems. This is the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And welcome back to my channel, my lovelies. Thank you for joining me. If you're new to my channel, I release my deep dive at crime content on a Wednesday and a Sunday religiously. If you like crime and consistency, then this is definitely the channel for you. Today's case, you've asked me to cover a zillion times. I've resisted because I really don't like doing cases that have been done to death, but you could only be asked a certain amount of times before realizing that even though there is so much information out there, people still want to know more. And I hope if you've watched documentaries, read books, and listened to the reports in this case, you're still going to take away something new from my coverage of it. Let me know in the comments if that's the case. Also, as ever, massive thank you to my Patreon and YouTube subs. Could not do this without you. You are all adored, as are every single one of you who give me a like or a comment or a subscription. If you've not subscribed and you're back here again, you know, subscribe, get your notifications on. It's a welcoming and lovely community. Join me for a live chat. It's always fun. Let's get on with today's case. Let me take you back to the 14th of June 2015. This is when concerned neighbours end up calling at the Greene County home of 48-year-old Claudine, known as Dee Dee Blanchard. This is on North Volunteer Street, Springfield, Missouri. And Dee Dee shared that particular home with her teenage daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. The mother and daughter were really well known in the local community. They were actually really local celebrities. And there are lots of reasons we'll cover for this. But Gypsy, essentially from birth, had suffered from a range of very serious health conditions. These included leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and epilepsy. She was also confined to a wheelchair, and she basically depended on her mother for full-time care. So her mother was a full-time carer. She was available to her 24/7. And this had really been the case since Gypsy had been born. So neighbours had actually gone round to the house because they'd seen some really troubling posts on Gypsy and Dee Dee's shared Facebook page. The first one stated, "That bitch is dead," followed by a second, "I effing slashed that fat pig," and her sweet innocent daughter, her scream was so effing loud, LOL. Clearly, totally out of character for a shared public Facebook post, and deeply concerning. This is not the language that they've seen of Dee Dee or indeed of Gypsy. So being really concerned, compassionate neighbours, they'd called, seen whether they could get somebody to answer the phone. Nobody had done, so they'd actually instead gone to the property, and at this point they hadn't got any response from the property either, which is deeply concerning. So then they inform the police, obviously, and they come round to do a wellbeing check on Dee Dee and Gypsy. And you can imagine in that moment, they're probably just thinking that they're not there, somebody could have hacked the Facebook page. Believe me, I have had mine hacked. It appears that people are very clever with that stuff. It can happen, and you'd be hoping for the best without a shadow of a doubt. But when the officers go into the home, wow, they're met with an intensely grisly scene. So first of all, they find Dee Dee's body. It's face down on a bloody mattress in her bedroom, and they could tell just from looking at her and the blood loss that she'd been stabbed numerous times. She'd actually been stabbed 17 times, and she'd also been slashed twice with a blade. They were able to establish that she died between 24 hours and 36 hours beforehand, and they immediately noted that there'd been no forced entry. So that in itself is relatively suspicious. We would imagine if this is a home invasion that's gone wrong, there would be a forced entry. But of course, the bigger concern, and it is an enormous one, is there's no sign anywhere of Gypsy. Bear in mind that as far as people are concerned, Gypsy is a very immobile, disabled young girl. She's very vulnerable, and suddenly she's nowhere to be seen. Neighbours are terrified. And the police are concerned that she's maybe been abducted. They notice straight away that the wheelchair that she uses to get around and many of the numerous medications that she has to take to apparently stay alive, they're still in the house. Now, immediately the murder investigation is launched and the police are fastidious about searching for this missing teenager. Now, let's just take a look at Dee Dee, because it's important that we experience an understanding of who this woman was, where she came from, and what her life had been like up until the point where she had her daughter Gypsy. So Dee Dee was basically estranged from her family in Louisiana. There was no love lost there. She was considered the black sheep of the family very early on, and there was good reason for that. Dee Dee earned that position. She was known to steal from family members. This is something that she would do in particular if things weren't going her way. It was a retaliation technique, but obviously it's a very hostile way of operating. It's a threatening circumstance where you feel that if you don't do somebody else's beck and call, there'll be something that affects you financially, for example, or you'll have something of yours stolen that has meaning. That's how Dee Dee operated. She was somebody who, as she grew up, always wanted to get their own way. It's very prevalent and present from a very early age. That's what her family discuss, that she was somebody who wanted the world to be shaped and formed as she desired. According to her family, she didn't care if she hurt people in the process. And there's something even more sinister about Dee Dee's potential actions. According to the family, they felt that she was actually guilty of serious foul play. So while she was working as a nurse's aide, her mother had died. And the family actually suspected that Dee Dee had starved her to death. So she'd denied her food as a form of punishment. Now, even though that might feel and sound a little bit outlandish, when we look at the patterns of behaviour where Dee Dee is concerned, I happen to sympathise and empathise with the family. I think there's some really sinister behaviours that are within Dee Dee. So she actually has her baby, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, in July 1991. But before Gypsy's even born, her father, Rod Blanchard, actually separated from the 24-year-old Dee Dee. This is after a shotgun wedding and a really short marriage. I mean, he'd only been 17 at the time. And I think we can ultimately all agree that 17 and 24, you are a very different person at 24 than you are at 17. There was a massive power imbalance. And I think where Dee Dee is concerned, she's a relatively manipulative person anyway. So I would imagine that being her partner would be challenging, particularly at the age of 17. And you're very young to have a child at that age as well. He claimed that he left the relationship because he'd married for the wrong reasons. I can again sympathise with that. At 17, you don't really have a reason to get married on the whole. You're just meant to go out enjoying yourself and getting to know who you are. And the consequence of that is that some of the decisions that you make haven't necessarily been thought that far ahead. So at this point, Dee Dee and Gypsy go to live with her family. So now we have Dee Dee presenting as a single mother. And it's not long before Dee Dee started to claim that Gypsy was unwell. And she starts to conclude things that firstly, she's not qualified to conclude. And secondly, as far as I can turn up in the research, it isn't really backed up by any evidence. So she concludes at this point that Gypsy's suffering from sleep apnea at 3 months old. For a lot of you out there, you'll know what sleep apnea is. It's when people actually often have to wear machines that help them breathe at night. It's when you potentially snore and then your breath is held and it becomes problematic. So arguably, it's things that we see in people who are older. A lot of time there are weight issues aligned with that. But certainly a 3-month-old, it is quite unusual to have sleep apnea. They do medical tests, extensive medical tests. This includes overnight sleep monitoring, where they have a sleep clinic and they actually check in perfectly with the monitoring of that individual's sleep pattern. And as far as Gypsy is concerned, nothing is presented. There are no issues. But this isn't something that placates Dee Dee, no. She wants to continue this belief system that her daughter is unwell. And it feels like she has such an intention and such a desire to create that reality that things begin to snowball. So she claims Gypsy is suffering from a chromosomal disorder, says that it's caused this wide range of serious health issues. But the professionals who actually medically examined her, they never found any. There was no evidence to support Dee Dee's claims at all. Yet, despite this, as a small child, Gypsy's made to use a walker. So we're seeing that her mother's being advised, there's nothing wrong with your child, and let's be honest, if you have a baby and they're growing up, developmentally you want them to achieve the milestones. You're certainly not looking as a well-adjusted human being to find issue with your child. Some of us are over-anxious, some of us have fears for our kids, but certainly we're not going to put obstacles in their way like a walker that's unnecessary. But Dee Dee has no issue with this. It's as if she's trying to create a world around her daughter that is not a reality, but that is a reality that she's wanting to create. Dee Dee also goes on to claim that she had muscular dystrophy. If you don't know what muscular dystrophy is, it's a very degenerative muscle wasting disease, which again is something that was going to be quite obvious to the medical experts. But this is the story that Dee Dee's telling. There is that belief that if you tell a lie enough, it becomes a truth. And it feels like Dee Dee's definitely operating in that world. Now, when Gypsy gets to around 8 years of age, she gets involved in a really minor accident on the back of her uncle's motorbike. And when this accident occurs, she grazes her knee. But when Dee Dee arrives back with Gypsy after basically having her checked over, Gypsy's been given a wheelchair. And Dee Dee tells a story that Gypsy's been told through her that she needs to use one from now on. There's a graze on her knee. There were no serious injuries. But in that moment, Dee Dee has used this as an opportunity to make it clear to her family there is a legitimate reason why the wheelchair is being used, that the doctor has advised this. And then from there, Dee Dee goes on to claim that her daughter's paralysed from the waist down. Again, outlandish, completely unsubstantiated medically. But this is the tale that Dee Dee is telling and is very, very happy to tell. Bear in mind the kind of objectional personality that we have where Dee Dee is concerned, the historical beliefs of the family. There's a fear level around Dee Dee. People know that there are consequences if they disagree with her. There are consequences if they challenge her. And so people quietly acknowledge and accept that even though Dee Dee may be, shall we say, unhinged, I would put it in that category, the challenge doesn't necessarily exist to the degree that it should exist. She then goes on to claim that Gypsy had leukemia. For those of you who know about childhood leukemia, often outcomes are excellent. Children with leukemia do get well as long as it is discovered early enough. But this is a serious and debilitating experience that any child would have to face with lots of treatments in hospital. It can take years. And apparently this is all going on in one small body. And she even convinced Gypsy to let her shave her head because she said that because of the leukemia, the hair was going to fall out anyway because of the medication that she's taking. So whilst Gypsy was clearly reluctant, let's be honest, when you're 8, 9, 10 years of age as a female, your hair is something that you really value. It's intrinsic to your personality. It's intrinsic to your style. It means that you look like other kids. And with respect, that's all you want. You want to fit in when you're a child. To have your hair shaved off is going to be challenging, upsetting, distressing. But she convinces Gypsy it's better than having those lumps of hair fall out due to the medication. So she lets her mum do it. I would be honest, I don't think she'd have had much choice in the matter anyway, but she complies. And Gypsy ends up wearing hats and wigs to cover the baldness because clearly there is a level of discomfort with the fact that she doesn't have any hair. Now we all know, in truth, Dee Dee just needs Gypsy to look the part. She's fabricating a story, and that story needs certain characters. And Gypsy may be an unwilling character at this moment in time, but she's certainly the main character in the delusion that Dee Dee's creating. And it works because when she is seen in public, there is not one person who questioned the diagnosis. And that means that the story that's been created, the lie that's become a truth, it amplifies because people buy into that bias. She looks like a sick child, therefore she must be a sick child. Now, it's around this time, with this multitude of sicknesses and apparent diagnoses, that Dee Dee takes Gypsy from mainstream education and decides that she's going to homeschool her. But there isn't much teaching going on at home, because this isn't about her child's needs, is it? This isn't fundamental to the care for her daughter. This is actually, again, about disguise. If you've got a child at school, well, people are going to notice. If you've got a child at school who isn't being consistently watched by you, well, they may step outside of the role that you've created. This is about self-protection for Dee Dee, simple as. So Dee Dee doesn't care about whether she's educated in any way, shape or form. It's not part of a script. And she even goes as far as to then start telling people that Gypsy actually has a mental capacity of a 7-year-old. She said that she was damaged at birth, she'd had this premature birth, and the consequence was that she had developmental delay. But actually, Gypsy's very bright. She actually teaches herself to read looking at Harry Potter books. This isn't helped by her mother. This is Gypsy's own volition. And then her mother starts to claim that Gypsy isn't even the age that she is, that she's younger than she actually was. And it's quite bizarre, because over time, the difference between the alleged and actual age increases. Now, what I would say is we have this unusual collision, because Gypsy does have a very childlike, high-pitched, reedy voice. She's also got this very tiny, frail frame, and that just means that she completely fits the role. So you can understand that in public, people buy into the fact that she's a younger child. And no one questioned what her mother claimed, aside from members of her own family. Because even though they weren't overtly challenging her, they didn't believe Gypsy was ill at all. And after moving in with her father and her stepmother, Dee Dee's back to her old tricks as far as the whole premise of potential foul play is concerned. So she's been taken in by them. You would imagine some graciousness, some gratitude, but no. The stepmother was literally convinced she was poisoning her food with weed killer. And believe me, that stepmother, she became seriously ill. And they actually confront Dee Dee about this. And they also confront her at this point about the treatment of her daughter and the suspicions that they even have about the surrounding issue with the mother's death earlier. Now, she leaves at this point because now the game's up. They've recognised that as far as they're concerned, she's killed her mother, that she's trying potentially to kill her stepmother, and that she is keeping a well child sick as far as public ideas of that child is concerned. And that's too much for her. She doesn't want that kind of suspicion because she knows that that's going to wreck any of this myth that she's trying to create regarding the life that she's living. So she ends up moving to New Orleans and she takes Gypsy with her. Now, the reason that I fully believe that the stepmother was telling the truth about believing she was being poisoned is because the minute that Dee Dee departs, her stepmother regained full health. You look for common denominators, and there's a clear common denominator there, isn't there? Wherever Dee Dee goes, chaos ensues, people can lose their lives, get really sick, or be kept sick because Dee Dee likes the attention. And certainly we could say that Dee Dee likes some power and control also. Now, when they get to New Orleans, Dee Dee basically lives off Rod's child support payments. So Gypsy's father is paying child support, and that's how she maintains her lifestyle. She also gets money off the state. And of course, because she has what would be considered a very sick child, she gets a lot of extra payments because she's got all these alleged ailments. So in short, what we could argue is that Gypsy is basically Dee Dee's meal ticket. But the problem with that is if you've got a meal ticket, you need that meal ticket to comply. So she needs to play her part. Gypsy needs to do what her mother says so that they can live the life that they're living. So this means that Gypsy's days are basically full of hospital visits, they're full of medical procedures as well. This is all for a range of conditions that her mother's insisted that she had. This is one of the issues that I have with this case, because it very much feels like we have this pushy parent leading professionals. That shouldn't be the case. They're saying that there is nothing wrong with this child, and yet for whatever reason that isn't limiting the opportunities that Dee Dee's getting to have a whole heap of tests and treatments done on Gypsy. It feels like the presence of Dee Dee is so powerful that it makes medical practitioners second guess themselves. And that's weak. It's not your job as a medical professional to agree with what a parent is saying. It's your job to be diligent, resourceful, and to acknowledge reality. And at this point, that's what should be occurring. Bear in mind, these are things that they can test for. Her mum's insisting that she's got leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and she's got seizures apparently. All of these things are what she's telling them. So instead of them saying, well, this is all BS, this isn't real, we can test all of this and your child is not unwell in that respect, they actually put Gypsy on anti-seizure meds. Now bear in mind, a lot of the tablets and treatments that Gypsy's placed on, they're not comfortable, they have bad side effects. So we also know that Dee Dee has no concern or consideration for the harm that she's causing the kid. In fact, the harm that she's causing her kid is a byproduct of what's required to essentially keep the lifestyle that she's decided she wishes. And bear in mind as well, we're looking at somebody who's enjoying the attention, she likes the medics fussing around her, and basically Gypsy is her creation. And no one is going to interfere with that creation. And I think that Dee Dee terrifies the medics. So we have Gypsy now completely at her mother's will, and Dee Dee's speaking to the medical professional. She's saying that she's got problems with her sight and hearing. And if you actually look at the childhood pictures of Gypsy, she's in a wheelchair. She's wearing large, thick glasses. And part of this is because she's convinced all those who are meant to be helping her daughter that actually they should ignore their instinct and they should do what she asks, not what's best for her child. Also, the wheelchair often had an oxygen tank and also a feeding tube attached, because Dee Dee claimed that Gypsy had trouble swallowing, and she even had a feeding tube inserted so that liquid formula could be delivered directly into her stomach. She's put her child through all those things. It's unbelievable to imagine and envisage a parent actively seeking those kind of treatments for a daughter that can essentially eat. Now, the mother and daughter then move again. It's in 2005. And note the fact that they're moving around a lot. Why would they move around a lot? Well, you know what? You don't want professionals getting too involved. You don't want them digging too deep. If you've created this picture and this possibility and you're living on that picture and possibility, the last thing that you want are interviewing teachers or doctors, etc., digging too deep into your lifestyle. You certainly don't want them starting to become concerned that maybe your daughter's absolutely fine and you're the person who needs to be treated. So they move again, 2005, it's following the Hurricane Katrina. Now bear in mind that devastated New Orleans, destroyed thousands of homes, and it actually destroyed their home as well. So at this point, Dee Dee and Gypsy are actually airlifted to Missouri. But this move actually enables Dee Dee to continue to exploit Gypsy and actually to amplify all those ailments to take advantage of it. Because in 2008, she actually gets in contact with a charity called Habitat for Humanity. And they go ahead and they build a wheelchair accessible home for them. This is a big deal. Handed a home handmade for you because your daughter's so unwell. Because all these pro-social people and charities want to help you to get back on your feet. You've had an awful time. House has got destroyed in a hurricane. What can they do to make your life better after you've had the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune thrown on you? And here we are now, handed this home that was painted pink, even had a hot tub with it. And people love it. It's a feel-good story. And Dee Dee and Gypsy, they become local celebrities because everyone wants to embrace them. Everyone wants to let them know that their situation has meaning and that they want to embrace that meaning and help them. Everyone feels sorry for them. Everyone wants to take care of them. And Dee Dee, wow, she has got no issue whatsoever with accepting everything that came their way. And boy, did free stuff come their way. They had free flights, free stays in hotels during hospital visits. They got trips to Disneyland. They got lots of backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts. They were frequently going there. And that country singer was so moved by their story that she even gave them $3,000. So people were really invested in this story. Now, it's also at this point that Dee Dee goes ahead and alters her name. So she changes the name from Claudine to Claudine Blanchard. I know what a lot of you are thinking. You're like, why on earth would she choose to call herself pretty much exactly the same, just with a slightly different vowel ending? Well, I'll let you know my theory. The thing about changing a name is it doesn't have to be that change for people not to be able to find you on a system. If you want to cover your tracks and not allow people to find your history, particularly let's say if medics are causing concern around some of your behaviours, then just these small alterations are going to make a difference, and a big difference potentially to your life. But what you don't want to do when it comes down to a name change, particularly if you're hiding things, is be in a situation where people may find your behaviour odd when they're calling you. So if you change your name from Claudine to Jean, for example, and then you're just buying your tomatoes in the supermarket, and then somebody two behind you's like, Jean, Jean, Jean. Why is Jean not talking to me? I don't know, I think she's a bit rude. She isn't rude, she's always very pleasant. Well, she's ignoring you now, and she can definitely hear. She's not got a problem with the hearing. Jean, 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 Jean. I'm gonna have to tap her on the shoulder. Jean. All right. Sorry, I was lost in a world of concentration about tomatoes. It's a problem. It's a problem. But Claudine and Claudine, you're going to turn around, aren't you? I'm not sure why I went for Jean. I'm going to be honest with you. Just for role play. Just for role play. Anyway, what we've got now is all of this unrest, the name change, and the added bonus as far as Dee Dee is concerned about being made homeless. Because Dee Dee's able to go, oh, you know what? All of Gypsy's medical records were destroyed in the hurricane, including her birth certificate. I don't know about you, I don't live in the States, but in the UK, you just go on a computer and you get a new birth certificate. It's not even that expensive, but it was a bit more complex, of course, for Dee Dee. She couldn't do that. She just doesn't get another one, and basically makes it easier to lie about Gypsy's age, and also, of course, to lie about Gypsy's illnesses, because now she's got a complete excuse when she goes and sees new doctors to say that the medical notes aren't available. She can't back them up because they've all been destroyed. I'm just going to throw it out there. Has anyone heard of multidisciplinary working? I mean, computer systems should be able to actually align these. I know that I'm talking about a time where the internet wasn't as it was, but still things were aligned. But nonetheless, it's enough to create an obstacle and a blocker when she sees new medics. She even goes ahead and forges a copy of her birth certificate, and that birth certificate's got a date of 1995, not 1991. Now, of course, all these things could be very easily investigated, but that's only if you're really looking. People don't tend to worry too much about the information they're presented. They believe, because most of us go through our lives trusting and having a bias that if somebody's telling us something, well, it's going to be the truth. And certainly if somebody turns up with a birth certificate, it's not necessarily going to be found on the database if we check it. But why would we check the database? We're just going to accept it verbatim. And this is great. Dee Dee is creating this whole web of lies, and it's becoming substantiated with the fake evidence that she's actually presenting. In fact, on Gypsy's 18th birthday, her father actually speaks to her, and Dee Dee says, don't mention her age. She claims that Gypsy thought she was only 14 years of age. I want to run to the child and remove her. You know, at the end of the day, if you're told, you know what, Gypsy thinks she's 4 years younger than she is, and I haven't told her anything different, I would be like, this individual should not be within 300 feet of this child. This is really atypical parental behaviour. But at the same time, let's remind ourselves, Dee Dee is not a person that you challenge. There are harsh consequences when that occurs. And Dee Dee actually adds insult to injury where Gypsy's father is concerned, because she goes ahead and tells neighbours, of course she does, that her father's basically an alcoholic drug addict who pays no child support whilst all the while cashing his monthly support checks, because he paid literally every single month. But again, that plays into the victim mentality. Oh, how sorry do you feel for me? I've got this really sick child and I've got this deadbeat ex, and so on and so forth. And also it alienates him from having any opportunity to support Gypsy to some degree, because he isn't welcome in her life by herself or pretty much any in the community who have heard about him. This must have been blindsidingly confusing for Gypsy. When she was a child, she's not stupid. She knows that she doesn't suffer many of the ailments that her mother's claiming she did. First of all, she knows she can walk. I mean, imagine that big, massive red flag. You know you can walk. Your mum's telling everybody that you're paralysed. You're being put in a wheelchair to go out. And you're colluding with this lie because that's your mum. You're going to do what she tells you through fear, through compliance, through love. You're going to do what you're asked. Particularly if you're getting benefits from that, because she can evidence, well, this is why we have to do it. But for Gypsy, the conflict, as a child, you want to run, you want to play, you want to be with your peers, and you can do that. But you've got this massive limiter in the form of your mother. The confusion, the pain, the emotional distress, the anger, all of those feelings would be absolutely expected. So Gypsy is living in this constant state of emotional flux and confusion. And she's confined to this wheelchair, though she doesn't need to be. She gets carried, she gets lifted by Dee Dee when she's not in it. And when she's actually in the wheelchair, there is an expected code of behaviour. First of all, she's got to stay really quiet. She's got to pretend she can't walk. Now, Gypsy also, along with knowing that she can walk, knows she can eat. She doesn't even need this feeding tube that's in her belly. But she's somebody who's going along with this because her mother has constructed this whole mythical experience and she doesn't feel powerful enough to challenge it. But there is one thing that she's brought up believing, as in she doesn't question it, she genuinely thinks it's real, and that's that she's got leukemia. So she's living with the stress and fear that she actually is seriously ill. Now just take a minute to actually explore that in your own minds, that you're happy for your child to believe that she's got a serious life-limiting illness, and that she doesn't feel that that emotional pain that Gypsy would be carrying is something that she's concerned about. Again, it's really important to mark the kind of personality that we're talking about with Dee Dee. The malevolence level in this woman is astonishingly high as far as I'm concerned. Even when it comes down to the fact that she's manipulated all of these doctors, we're not talking small fry changes. We're talking things like she managed to have 2 of Gypsy's saliva glands surgically removed. She claimed that one of the problems with Gypsy was that she was constantly drooling. And the truth is, Dee Dee had just figured out that if you apply anaesthetic to gums, it makes you drool. You know when you go to the dentist, they give you an anaesthetic, you can't eat or drink for like 9 hours, you speak weird, feel a little bit like you've had a stroke, that kind of look. Well, with respect, she knows on a lower level, if you put anaesthetic on the gums, you know, the topical one, it actually creates this drooling. So she then attends appointments with Gypsy in this situation. She drools, it convinces the medic to go ahead and actually remove those 2 salivary glands. Now that's problematic. Our salivary glands are there for a reason. And if they're not excessively drooling, if they're not creating too much saliva, then when you remove them, that's going to cause dryness. But again, why be concerned about the impact physiologically on her daughter? All she wants is the opportunity to be in control, the opportunity to essentially feel more medical than the medics who are meant to be treating Gypsy, to have that power. And also, the byproduct of harm to her daughter really doesn't actually register because she has a bigger picture. And that's for everybody to see her as a saviour and also to see her daughter as an individual with all these complex needs. It fits the purpose and it certainly fits the profit at that moment in time. So this unnecessary surgery, combined with all the unnecessary medications, actually causes the vast majority of Gypsy's teeth to fall out, which again is diabolically difficult to work with as a human being emotionally. If you were a child and you were losing all your teeth and you feel the difference that that causes between you and your peers and people around you, it affects the way that you feel attractiveness wise. That is incredibly painful. But Dee Dee doesn't care. In fact, it's great because it helps create this perfect image of a really seriously ill child. And my God, Dee Dee will be literally celebrating every time one of those teeth comes out. Also, if it's not bad enough what I'm describing now, Gypsy's home environment wasn't that much better. It's really chaotic. It seems that Dee Dee had this real tendency to hoard, and this would obviously make living there more complex. There were papers and boxes just piled up everywhere. It was completely disorganized. However, there was a closet in the house and it was filled literally from top to bottom with tablets, medications, but unlike pretty much in every other area of that house, which was a disaster, that closet, that medical point in the home, so well ordered. Every single thing labelled. And that's really intriguing. Because if you say to yourself, oh, well, hoarding, it's on the OCD spectrum. People can't help it. They're dealing with emotional distress and they're managing their behaviour through the collection of these hoarding items. Okay, but you don't get to have that perspective if you can keep something perfectly ordered and tidy. No, that's a choice-based behaviour. And where OCD feels out of the control of the individual enduring it, in this case, Dee Dee is fully in control. In fact, I would say her hoarding behaviour is more to do with laziness. She isn't that concerned about her environment. And actually, she has far more interesting areas as far as she's concerned to expend her energy. And that comes down to her daughter, the medical issues that she's creating for her, and of course, the joy of being able to open that cupboard and psychologically feel better and bigger and more powerful than the medics who should have been treating her daughter appropriately. That's her victory. That's her, I can manipulate anybody and everybody to get what I want. And that's why it's so ordered. And that's why I don't give in to this idea that there was this hoarding element to her nature. She was just very lazy and didn't actually care about the needs of her child at all. Now, there was another thing that she did, which again is indicative of that really negative behaviour patterns that we've seen played out prior to this, with the way that her family observe her and the actions that she's taken in that family. Because at some point she'd even managed to steal a hospital prescription pad. And that shows you the intent. She wants to be able to have access to whatever she wants, even if a doctor isn't going to be privy to allowing it her. One of the things that I'd say about Gypsy is when she described her mother, particularly when she was very young, she reflected and said that she and her mother were best friends. She really looked up to her. She saw Dee Dee as a guardian angel. This is completely contextual. But the vast majority of children, no matter how you're bringing them up, the logistics of that reality is that you're their primary carer. And you might not be a great primary carer, but essentially you look to that person to feed you, to clothe you, to keep you warm, and so on and so forth. And unless there is something diabolically obvious about the abuse that you're enduring, the consequences of having that relationship are you tend to see that person as a hero. Like I said, as you get older and you can discern their behaviours, particularly when it's this kind of intolerable behaviour, you genuinely accept the relationship as it is and believe the best of that. So she sees her mother as her saviour. And this is something that is very challenging because as Gypsy starts to get older, she starts to realise that this identity that she has isn't quite right. So as a child, she believes that her mother's her only friend, aside from her stuffed animals that she collects. But as Gypsy grows older, her mother becomes the person that she literally fears the most in life, and with good reason. Now, when you think about abusers, I would say there are some real typical behaviours that Dee Dee uses. So she has successfully isolated her daughter from any other support network. And if you think about the fact that her family have already become suspicious about Gypsy's condition, she'd moved Gypsy out of the family home. So the support network, not just locally, but on a wider network regarding family, that's being completely disintegrated. Also, this severing with all the relatives, it includes the whole of the father's side, because Gypsy's father has tried to keep in contact with her. So Rod has constantly phoned, tried to build a relationship, but Dee Dee's literally always present whenever he calls. And so this limits the kind of conversation that they can have, both sides, because obviously Rod isn't going to ask questions that are going to cause issue for Dee Dee or to make Dee Dee suspicious of his intentions. And Gypsy's not really going to be able to express to her father what she wants because her mother is primarily always there. She's always in that powerful position. And as time passes, Dee Dee restricts Rod's time more and more and more. Eventually, she cancels plans that they've got, so Gypsy isn't able to go and visit him. And then, even though she's regularly cashing in his child support checks, which you would suggest would mean that some relationship should be given because he's always coming good with that, she has no respect for that. She wants the money, but she doesn't want Gypsy to have any contact with him at all. And so eventually, she ceases all contact with Rod. Again, the mindset of a mother who does that to meet her own needs is completely unwilling to acknowledge the needs of the child. For Gypsy, having a relationship with her father would have been pivotal and important, protective, of course, as well. But essentially, she has a right to that. But Dee Dee doesn't care. Like I said, Gypsy isn't a child, isn't a young person, she's an object. And she's an object that she will do whatever she wills to do with. And that's terrifying. Now, Gypsy had actually, as I said earlier on, been removed from mainstream education and she'd been homeschooled at the earliest opportunity. This is another thing that an abuser knows will mean there is less opportunity for social services to get involved, less opportunity for the eyes of others to be laid on their situation. This is what an abuser does. They know. Reduce contact with support networks. Try to isolate fully. Remove from any authoritarian system so that the child cannot be protected by that. Alienate them from their peers. Prevent teaching staff from monitoring the health. Because essentially by taking these potentials away, she imprisons Gypsy further. And again, this means that Dee Dee is calculating and cunning. She knows exactly what she's doing. In public, Dee Dee was always by Gypsy's side. She's holding a hand. So think about that. If you're an abuser, you're giving a very clear message to the person you're abusing. That is, I'm always there. I'm in power. I'm in control. I'm dominant. You put a foot wrong and there'll be consequences. And what she would do was she'd hold Gypsy's hand, and then if Gypsy said anything that was a little bit more intellectual or brighter, then she should apparently be saying, because of the age and developmental issues that Dee Dee's telling everyone she's got, she would actually squeeze Gypsy's hand really tightly. And that's a message to Dee Dee. It's telling her, track back, remember who you are, remember this act. And on top of all of this, Dee Dee, as we know, has convinced people that Gypsy's got a mental capacity of a 7-year-old. So as an abuser, she's got the perfect paradigm that she's created. This is a child who can't cope on her own, who doesn't really know what's happening around her, who understandably needs her always by her side because she's a hero, she's a main carer. She's ceased all contact from authority, all contact from family. She has full control of Gypsy. And aside from having full control of her life externally in the way I've just described, she also has full control of her internally. She controls her physical health. She controls her mental well-being. I don't think I've ever described a scenario where somebody is so controlled by another human being. And how does one escape that? How does one ever imagine setting themselves free? Now, as Gypsy gets older, she starts to ask those questions to herself. She's aware that she can walk, she's aware that she can eat, but more than that, she's aware that there's a world outside her home. She's curious, she's inquisitive. This doesn't sit well with Dee Dee at all. No, she wants to retain this grip of control on Gypsy. And the way that an abuser will do that is they'll exert more control. Gypsy said that the arguments would last for days and days, and her mother would just up the ante on the arguments and the punishments within those arguments to make it clear to Gypsy that she did not step out of line. And one of the things that she did, she wouldn't feed her for a couple of days. which is completely in keeping with the suspicions that the family have about her killing her own mother that way. And when you're starving someone, when you're taking away the immediate needs, the survival mechanism of that human being, it says something incredibly dark about your nature. It really does. It's a torturous experience being withheld food, and she does that without a second's thought. Gypsy also says that the punishments just became worse and worse and worse, and they became very physical in 2011. This is when she tries to run away, and I think we can all understand that. You would be running for the hills if you could. Could you imagine living this life? You have no locus of control. You have no physical capacity to tend to your own needs because somebody else is blocking the reality of that. People are convinced all around you that you're developmentally delayed. People are convinced that you are paralyzed. She's seen medics agreeing with her mother, so bear that in mind as well. You would see her as an omnipotent being, someone all-powerful, someone always present, someone who controlled every aspect of your world, including the players within that, like doctors. Gypsy is going to be terrified of ever escaping this scenario. And she tries to run away. I would have tried to run away as well. Who would not have tried to run away? Gypsy's actually 20, by the way, at this point. Now, everyone believes that she's still a teenager, but Gypsy as a person is physically 20 years old. And because she's been curious, because she's been intrigued about the world around her, because she wants to be more normal, more typical, because she's got all these normal, typical feelings that a young adult would have, including one in relationships, she's actually found a way to communicate online with a man. And she's devised this escape plan. So whilst Dee Dee is asleep, she packs this small bag of belongings and she meets up with the man, goes to his house. But 4 hours later, Dee Dee's discovered where she was and she brings her straight back home. Now, the wrath that Gypsy received was so severe that it was genuinely a terrifying punishment. She smashes Gypsy's laptop, she smashes a mobile phone, and that's a direct message. You do not have a right to contact anyone. I control who you speak to. And then she chained her to the bed for 2 weeks. Imagine the helplessness, the vulnerability, the fear, what could happen next. She also hit and punched Gypsy. She smashed her with a coat hanger. She starved her. Now, Gypsy said that all the while that horrible physical abuse was happening, she never once retaliated. She was just too scared to. She just felt that her mother was the all-powerful. So the idea of even raising a hand back or protecting herself just never even crossed her mind. And all she felt at that moment was that she was trapped. Because she knew that if she ran away again, it was going to really end badly for her. And she actually went into that state that I would consider as learned helplessness. This belief that there's literally no point. I just need to lie down and accept that this is my life. And that's an agonizing, grief-striking position psychologically for anyone, because we need autonomy. We need to believe that our choices have meaning. We need to know that our mistakes have got lessons. These are all things that make us well-adjusted humans. But Gypsy knows this and feels that it's out of reach, like standing behind glass and watching the world move around you, but having no power to lean into that area and situation. It's just so disheartening for Gypsy. Also, Dee Dee additionalized the psychological warfare as far as I'm concerned, because she actually tells Gypsy that she's filed paperwork with the police stating that Gypsy was mentally incompetent, and if she went to them for help, they wouldn't believe her. So again, it's what abusers do. They make you reason with unreasonable. They convince you of things that aren't real. And bear in mind, Gypsy has watched as medics bent and broke and flexed and agreed with her mother's desires. Why wouldn't the police do the same? That's the education of this child. She's grown up believing that what her mother says goes. So why would she question the fact that the police would be on her side? She fully believes they would be on her mother's side each and every day of the week. And again, she's now fully trapped in that situation of hostility, and she's living it day in, day out. Then we get to October 2012. This is when Gypsy is 21 years of age. And at this point, she connects with 23-year-old Nicholas Godejohn. This is online. Now, they connect online initially through a dating site, which is for Christians. And Gypsy's really open at this point about all the various conditions that she has right from the get-go. So she's getting this person that she's potentially going to date to buy into this belief system that her mother's created. But also, I guess, she's testing, is it possible that someone could love me even though I have to play this role? So she's placing her bets, she's hedging those bets really effectively. She's thinking to herself, maybe I'm going to have to continue this whole facade for a very long time. What if I can meet somebody who fully accepts me this way? And then I can have a relationship with them and I won't let my mother down. So she tells this person all about the conditions. And she asks Godejohn if it's a problem. He says, no, it's not a problem. It doesn't change who you are on the inside. So before long, this becomes very intense. They're professing their love for one another. And they realise that they need to keep this private because of Dee Dee, of course. So they start this private Facebook page, and this means that they can communicate with each other without Dee Dee finding out. And as time progresses, they start to discuss the plans that you'd expect for a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old to start discussing. They talk about wanting to get married. They talk about wanting a family. Can you imagine how alluring that would be for Gypsy? She's found a guy who accepts her, wants a future with her, and doesn't seem disheartened or dissuaded by the clear issues that she's dealing with. It would be so intoxicating to suddenly connect with this idea that a future could be normal. And Gypsy's so taken with this idea, she even starts to steal baby clothes from Walmart when her mother isn't looking. Again, she's trying to physicalize the reality of this potential. If you can take those little clothes and store them somewhere safe at home, then suddenly that dream in your mind, it becomes this distinct possibility. And it's something that really connects you. And the relationship with Godejohn is obviously something that's going to have massive meaning. She's been denied peer relationships. She's been denied contact. She's been denied communication. And here he is, fully connected in this moment to her. Now, Godejohn is a complex individual. So let's look at him for a minute. He was a young guy and he'd had a troubled past. Now, he actually lived 500 miles away from Gypsy in Big Bend, Waukesha, which is in Wisconsin. He lived with his mother, his stepfather, and his brother. He also had autism spectrum disorder, and he told Gypsy that he had Asperger's, but she actually didn't understand what this was, but she was fully accepting. I mean, the list of issues that she was meant to present with, this would have been water off a duck's back, wouldn't it? He also discussed the fact that he didn't have a lot of friends and he only had one real job in his life, which was holding a sign outside a pizza shop. So he basically spent all of his spare time on the internet. He had actually been in trouble with the police on one occasion, and it was not an ideal thing to do. We can all agree that exposing yourself in public is not a good idea. You know, it's a sexually predatory behaviour, totally incompatible with being a moral and law-abiding citizen, and we can absolutely give him a black mark against his name for doing that. Put your penis away. But essentially, that was the only crime that he'd actually been in trouble for. So Gypsy and Godejohn's relationship, it starts just strictly online, of course. There's this 500-mile distance and difference from where they live, and it carries on for 2 years. So you can imagine the kind of intensity they've reached at that point. You know, there's going to be a lot of frustration, there's going to be sexual feelings, there's going to be a feeling that you are star-crossed lovers and life is conspiring against you because you live so far away. And these are really intoxicating feelings. So they sent a lot of Facebook texts, emails, etc. Now, Dee Dee had literally no idea of Godejohn's existence because she'd never have permitted them to communicate. I mean, you just got to think about what happened when Gypsy tried to leave and she smashed up all the communication equipment. So Gypsy and Godejohn keep it secret. And actually, Gypsy later in court testifies to that truth. So it's something that they know they have to keep secretive.
When did you first meet Nick in person?
March of 2015.
So between October of 2012 and March of 2015, you hadn't actually met Nick in person?
That is correct.
How did you, what type of relationship did you have during that period of time?
Online relationship.
And by online, what do you mean?
Strictly communicating through Facebook.
Any other ways other than Facebook?
Instant text messaging, emails.
All by way of computer and cell phones?
Yes, sir.
Did you send videos to each other?
Yes, sir.
Prior to March of 15, when you indicated you met Mr. Godejohn for the first time in person, had your mother met him?
No, sir.
Did she know he existed?
No, sir.
Why that she didn't know?
Because it was a secret relationship and my mother would never allow me to have a boyfriend.
Why not?
Because she controlled every aspect of my life.
Did you and Nick ever talk about the fact that you were not allowed to date?
Yes.
How many times do you think?
I don't remember.
Did you and your mother ever have any discussions about whether you were ever going to be able to date?
Yes, sir.
Did you and Nick talk about that?
We may have.
What did your mother say about your ability to date going forward?
She said that it would never happen, that she would never allow it.
What about marriage? Did you and Nick ever talk about marriage?
Yes.
Did you and your mother ever discuss whether or not you'd be able to get married someday?
Yes.
What did she tell you?
She said that she wouldn't allow it.
Now, obviously, this relationship progresses, and in the first year of their relationship, there's a lot of confiding, and we get 1 year into it, and Gypsy actually reveals to Godejohn that she doesn't even need to be in a wheelchair. She actually tells him that she doesn't even suffer from many of the illnesses that her mother claimed she suffered from. She also starts to talk about the abuse and the emotional pain she's in, the punishments that she's suffered at her mother's hands. And for Godejohn, there's a level of powerlessness and helplessness in that moment. It's like, what? You're in a scenario where your own mother is lying about all of these things. She's forcing you to comply with a whole fabrication of a reality. That's going to be really anxiety-provoking, anger-provoking. And when you're helpless, you try to think about solutions to ease the helplessness. So they begin to devise these various plans because they want to be together. And that's their main focus. How do we find a way to connect physically, to be together physically? Now, Godejohn is really eager to meet Gypsy in person. They've been communicating online for a while. He feels clearly that he's in love with her at this moment in time. But this is really complex, of course, because Gypsy cannot go anywhere without her mother. So they come up with this plan where they can actually casually meet at the cinema. Gypsy is going to be there with Dee Dee, and the premise of this plan is they're just going to bump into Godejohn. Now, the way that Gypsy has planned this out in her mind is they're just going to kind of meet each other, then she's going to introduce Godejohn to Dee Dee, and at this point they'll be allowed to date because Dee Dee is like, oh, he's great. I mean, we can all see that this is highly naive. Remember, Dee Dee wants Gypsy to be with no one. So there's literally no way this would actually play out and come to fruition. But it makes sense that Gypsy is quite naive. She's not somebody who's been that calculating and cunning in the past. So she's thinking maybe her dreams could come true. Everyone's going to get on. It's going to be fine, and so on and so forth. So that's their plan A, to be together. So Gypsy subsequently sends Godejohn $800 in the mail. This is to cover his travel and accommodation so that they can actually meet. And she manages to steal this money from her mother's pouch and sends it to him in the mail. Now, according to Gypsy, they first met in March 2015. This was at Springfield Cinema. And the premise of this was they were going to go and watch Cinderella. And what can I say? How can I describe this particular meeting? This origin, shall we note, where Dee Dee connects with Godejohn. Well, it was an unprecedented disaster. Yeah, Dee Dee was really angry. She literally hated him from the moment they met. So first of all, she's immediately jealous of the attention that Gypsy's showing Godejohn. Also, she thinks it's super creepy that a grown man is sat alone watching a Disney movie. Kind of get that bit a little bit. But I don't know. I kind of like a Disney movie, you know, particularly Beauty and the Beast, for example. I don't know. I don't like the bad things that happen in Disney movies, but I like the happy ever after. But I kind of get it. Why is this grown man in the cinema watching Cinderella? So Dee Dee feels very uncomfortable about this. Now, whilst Gypsy is watching that film, bear in mind, she's even gone to the film dressed as Cinderella. Yeah, she's fully garbed out, costume, blonde wig, the lot. Anyway, during the movie, she excuses herself. She says she wants to go and use the bathroom. But in truth, she just wanted to go meet John, and she basically drags him into the men's toilets and they have sex there. So we're seeing this real development, aren't we? Gypsy is changing. Gypsy is growing. Gypsy wants to do things that adults do. She has a right to. She's an adult. But this is all without Dee Dee knowing. Now, following this sexual encounter, Dee Dee is absolutely incandescent with rage. So she basically says to Gypsy that she's not allowed to see John again. She even says that she's going to actually report him for having sex with a minor. Now, bear in mind, Gypsy is an adult. She can do whatever she wants, but the threat is something that's obviously going to be terrifying for Gypsy. She doesn't want to get this guy into trouble. And once again, she punishes Gypsy by smashing her laptop, her mobile phone. She gets a hammer actually and does that. And that's terrifying. How unhinged are you as a mother to actually do this to your child's equipment? And the messaging is very clear, isn't it? You put a foot out of line, a step out of line, and the consequences are grave for you. So this means that that lovely plan A that Gypsy and John have planned has failed. However, the pair do manage to actually keep their online relationship going. So they exchange hundreds of texts. And the main emphasis of this at the time is that they're planning this whole future in Wisconsin. They talk about having a family. And in one text conversation, Gypsy actually asks John if he would give her her first orgasm. And whilst it might be a bit icky to hear me saying that when you're looking at pictures of Gypsy, it's completely normal, isn't it? That's absolutely in context with where she is age-wise. She wants to have sex. She wants to feel what an orgasm is going to be like. And anybody who's had a relationship long distance or a relationship where they sex to be titillated by that kind of experience and conversation, it kind of adds to the allure of a relationship, particularly in the early stages of a relationship. And it's normal. So Gypsy is just acting in a very normal contextual way for her age frame. She asked him to, shall we say, pleasure her on their bus ride. And she even says, and I think this is quite naive, but it's very indicative of the fact that she is quite a naive girl. She says, you make my girly parts tingle. So there's sexualized behavior and elements to their conversation, but still there's this high naivety level where Gypsy is concerned. And they both agree that there is one fundamental issue that's standing in the way of their future happiness, and that's Dee Dee. Now, over time, their communications begin to focus on this very big obstacle that they have. They have Dee Dee that is causing all of their problems. Plan A failed. That didn't succeed. So now they have to consider other ways of being together. Now, Plan C, that was that Gypsy was going to fall pregnant by John. So they figured that he's the father of the child, well, he'd have to be involved in her life. But even though they consider that, the logistics are pretty challenging. We already know that Dee Dee stands in the way of them having any communication physically. So then they start talking about other options. And that's when the talk of love and sex and marriage and family, well, it turns to something altogether darker. And they begin devising a plan to remove Dee Dee from the equation permanently. Now, Gypsy at this moment in time is more and more desperate to escape this hostile home life. She's dealing with this increased aggression where Dee Dee's getting more violent towards her. So they start to focus on Plan B. And Plan B is murder. During the conversations between them, when they focus on this, they indulge in fantasy talk. He talks about how he's got these various alter egos. He calls one of them Victor, a 550-year-old vampire. And he has another that he just called his evil side. And that evil side enjoys killing. And Gypsy, in return, well, she creates her own alter egos too. And she refers to these alter egos by numerous names, including Ruby, Candy, Kitty. Each of those represents a different side of her. So Candy's her slutty side, whilst Ruby was her evil side. And during these fantasy talks, Goda John plays master with Gypsy and she plays slave. He even sent papers to her to the effect, when she signed them, that it suggested he owned her. Now, for those of you who don't know a lot about subs and doms, this is something that actually happens. You can literally go online and get a submissive and a dominant actual contract. People sign these. It's a sexual part of their behaviour and connection. And whilst people like me wouldn't do that, and I'm sure a lot of you would find that strange, this is something that happens in S&M areas. But even though that is not necessarily typical behaviour in relationships, it isn't outlandish. These things happen. And remember, they're playing in fantasy a great deal, so it doesn't necessarily mean there is anything deviant at this moment in time with their mindsets around their behaviours with one another. And also, part of this contract is that she capitalised his name in communications, and he sent her scripts to act out and videos for him. He discussed rape fantasies, but even though, again, some of you might find that extreme, these are quite common when it comes down to fantasy play in sexual behaviours. And like I said, even though it seems very deviant when we're talking about a story like this, I think it's important to hold on to the reality that lots of consenting adults actually play out these situations, role plays and fantasies, and it's not indicative of anything dark. So if you actually sign a contract, I don't know, like in that 50 Shades of Grey, where they do that there, and you get involved in some of these fantasies, it doesn't mean you're deviant. But what I would also know is these fantasies, unfortunately, do become a deadly reality, because the whole premise of them is they start to build on formulating plans to kill Dee Dee. Now, they have to figure this out really effectively, because obviously Dee Dee is somebody who will put up a fight, isn't she? She's not going to lie there and die because somebody walks into her house and threatens her, and they want to try to avoid that. So now the pair start to discuss Dee Dee's sleeping habits, because if she's a light sleeper, for example, if any of the floorboards in her room squeaked, they had to think about how they'd manage it. So Goda John decided that he'd use a knife to kill her, and he wants Gypsy to actually get one for him, and he also asked her to get him a taser, which is obviously going to try to make it difficult for her mother to fight back. And also he wants tape, presumably to restrict movement. He said that he planned to incapacitate her and then tape her mouth so that she can't scream, I guess. And then he's going to stab her. Now, Gypsy can't get hold of a taser, so this isn't something that's going to be able to play out, but obviously she can get hold of a knife. And they actually planned the murder for around a year. And that's interesting, because one could say, well, that's well planned. And another could say, well, actually, it's still in fantasy state. This is all about, well, we could do it. Let's titillate ourselves imagining what life would be like by doing it, but we're not actually carrying out the action. We're in fantasy play. We're in fantasy state. And that goes on for 12 months. And during that 12 months, Gypsy actually has second thoughts about it. But then, as you would expect, there is an inevitable argument that blows up between her and her mother. And at this point, she feels like she's reached that boundary. And she's just at that tipping off point where she can no longer manage the psychological torment and torture and emotional pressure placed on her by her mother. And she decides, let's go ahead. Now again, she's the person who goes ahead and sends Goda John money. This is so he can travel there. And he arrives in Springfield on the 8th of June 2015, checks in at the Days Inn motel. Now then we get to the 10th of June 2015, it's just after 2 a.m. As arranged, Gypsy leaves the house door unlocked. Dee Dee's already asleep in the bed at this point. To plan, Goda John arrives in the taxi, meets Gypsy at the rear of the property. Everything's going smoothly. It's exactly how it's going to play out. Gypsy's ready. She gives him her latex gloves to put on. And then she hands him a large, serrated knife. She'd managed to earlier shoplift it at Walmart. And she hands him duct tape as well. And then at that point, Gypsy goes into the bathroom, closes the bathroom door, sits on the floor and covers her ears. So even though she's planned, prepped, prepared, invited her mother's murderer through the door, now she wants to hide away from the reality of the actions that are going to play out. Meanwhile, go to John, he's ready. He goes into Dee Dee's room. She's asleep. She's on the bed, lying on her stomach. Now, he later tells the police that he actually, in that moment, considered raping her before actually going ahead and killing her, but he ultimately decided against it, and he just began stabbing her. And he stabs her in the back. He actually claimed to have stabbed her 4 times and slashed her across the back of the neck. And he believed that the 4th wound had actually gone into her lungs because it was very difficult to get the knife out. He actually had to yank the blade out. And during that attack, he just tells her again and again, never come between me and Ruby. So he's letting her know in those final moments, you deserve this and you'll never get the opportunity to do this to us again. Now, when they did the autopsy on Dee Dee, she'd actually been stabbed far more than 4 times. She'd been stabbed 17 times. And in the bathroom, whilst Gypsy's sitting covering her ears, she couldn't escape the sound. She heard her mother scream. But she described the scream that she heard as sounding like more of a scream of surprise than the kind you hear in horror movies when somebody's being attacked, and that stunned her. And she actually heard her mother, Dee Dee, asking who her attacker was before calling Gypsy's name. So Gypsy's hearing that, her mother calling for her. And Gypsy says that at that moment she nearly went and actually tried to help her, but she was just too terrified to move. And then everything went quiet. Now that the murder is completed, John goes to the bathroom. He gave it 3 knocks, 2 scratches, just to let Gypsy know it was him, as agreed. I think we can all agree it was probably unnecessary for him to do that. Who else would be the person knocking on the bathroom door and scratching on it? Throwing it out there, a little bit OTT, but again, that makes me think about what they are playing out in this moment in time, the extra drama. Who needs to knock 3 times and scratch twice to let them know that he's just murdered the woman that's just been heard screaming? Not required. Throwing it out there, a little bit of the OTT drama side, but that's what's playing out here. There's a fantasy level to what's occurring. He even refers to Gypsy by another name when he's killing Dee Dee. So there is a level of not being in the here and now, not being in the present. It's like they've pumped themselves up full of these fantasies. And this has allowed them to trip over into reality. Now, before Gypsy actually comes out of the bathroom, she first shaves her legs and also her pubic hair. And you may find that strange, but her mother never let her do that. So part of that is also a statement. It's saying, no one controls me anymore. I can do this. And there'll be a sexual element to that as well. She'll feel more grown doing those things, taking care of her body in that way. But most of us would not be thinking about a sexual connection just after our mother has been murdered. Now, after she's done that, she walks out of the bathroom and then they go around the house and they remove objects that basically suggested Gypsy lived there. So they remove photos and things like that. Also, they clean up the blood from a wound that John's caused himself because he stabbed himself when he was killing Dee Dee. Forensic nightmare, just gonna throw it out there. Forensic nightmare, if you have stabbed yourself in the hand, there will be blood everywhere. It will be your blood. That is not helpful if you're trying to avoid prosecution. But that's what they do. They try to clean up at least his wound in that moment. Then the 2 of them have sex on Gypsy's bed, which is in the room next door to where her mother's butchered body lies. But again, that's an act of rebellion. That's a F you. That's a we're free. And even though it's so macabre to describe it in the way that I've just described the reality of what's played out, you can fundamentally again see how they feel that they have been prisoners and now they have escaped. Now, Goda John later claimed again to the investigators, because boy, he did not hold back, that they basically did all three, and that means vaginal, anal, and oral sex. They also take $4,000 from Dee Dee's safe, and then they leave the property. It's around 6 a.m. Get a taxi to Days Inn Motel in North Springfield, and that's where Goda John was staying because she sent him the money to do that. And they ultimately had to spend an extra day in North Springfield at the Days Motel because the Greyhound bus they needed to get back to Wisconsin, they didn't have any room on that bus for them. Now, Goda John did have a return ticket that had been purchased previously, but they had to get her a ticket. And that meant that they were captured numerous times on CCTV after the killing. So at the motel, getting the taxi, at the bus station getting the ticket, at the bus station getting the actual Greyhound. In fact, the police would later state that they left the perfect trail of breadcrumbs, accounting for their every move. There was nothing sophisticated about this crime at all. Like I said, a lot of this was planned in fantasy. They hadn't thought through the actual consequences, and that is so evident in their behaviours after. So we get to the evening of the 13th of June 2015. So the pair arrive on the Greyhound bus in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Goda John calls his mum. She goes and picks them up, of course she does. He's with his girlfriend. You're excited, aren't you? You're thinking, oh, great. I'm going to meet this girl who actually sees my son for who he is, accepts him as he is, and that's going to be something really positive. This is the first time she's ever met Gypsy. And whilst Gypsy's actually at Goda John's home, this is when she posts those messages on her mother's Facebook page. And this is what clearly alerts the neighbours back in Springfield that something's got to be wrong. And the reason she says that she actually did that is because she wanted the police to find her mother's body. So there has got to be some guilt there. She wants to alert them to the fact that her mother's dead. And that demonstrates conflict. So Gypsy and Goda John, their main emphasis and belief system in the scenario that they're trying to play out and plan out is that the authorities are going to think it's a random criminal that's killed Dee Dee. And you're like, what? Sorry, what? Yeah. The plan is that they're just going to look and be like, somebody's randomly invaded this home and killed her. Yeah, I kind of get that. Why would you use the opportunity to also write negative things on yours and her Facebook page? I mean, literally, it's indicative of a relationship. Saying that she's dead and it's a celebratory thing makes it look like somebody would know her, which would mean it wasn't a random home invasion. It was a personally aggressive crime towards somebody that wasn't liked. That's a really good point. Have you got a time machine? I need to go back and change some things. And that's before the fact there was all blood of his over the actual environment as well. But again, in their very naive minds, that's what they're hoping, that basically the authorities are just going to be like, oh no, at the end of the day, Dee Dee was killed by somebody and Gypsy just disappeared. Gypsy just disappeared. Gypsy, do you really think that they're just going to be like, oh, Gypsy's just disappeared? I do. I think that they're going to think that I just disappeared without your wheelchair that you needed. Again, this isn't going the way I thought it was going to go. And also, just the fact that all your medication's there. It's a good point. It's a good point. I haven't thought this through very effectively. And on top of that, Dee Dee, they're not going to be like, oh, Dee Dee's just a missing person when your mother's dead on the bed and you seem to have been carried off into the ether. They're probably going to think it's an abduction. Jeez, I really do need that time machine now, Em. Not thought through one bit. But this is what they believe. They're going to have this new life together in Wisconsin. I mean, I guess in their heads they're thinking, who's going to really think the girl with hair who can walk and basically have normal relationships and is intellectually not impaired at all is the same person as the person they're looking for? I can kind of get that. But it's just planned so awfully, isn't it? Really childlike. And authorities are literally immediately behind these two. The investigators were really quickly able to establish that the Facebook posts that had been made about Dee Dee, they'd actually been posted from an IP address in Wisconsin. Literally, when I say a breadcrumb trail, I really do mean it in this case. And also, a neighbour and somebody who was actually a confidant of Gypsy, they provided the detectives with printouts of lots of online conversations between Gypsy and Goda John. And those actually showed his name. And then on top of that, if that's not incriminating enough, they've got the CCTV footage of Goda John and Gypsy's journey from Springfield to Milwaukee. And she ain't looking like somebody who's been taken hostage, guys, at all. The authorities are like, I don't know who this guy is, but he's either Jesus or a murderer, because she's walking. So obviously that's going to cause some issues, right? She's walking. Why is this kid walking? She's meant to be disabled. And that in itself is going to ring lots of alarm bells, because as far as people are concerned, this child has been highly vulnerable, highly fragile, very disabled, and there she is hopping on a greyhound with a guy that she's clearly intimate with. So now they realise that there must have been some kind of long-running fraud that she's been involved with where her mother is concerned, i.e. pretending that she was unwell when actually she's totally able. So we then get to the 16th of June 2015. This is just a day after Dee Dee's body has been discovered. Police arrest Gypsy and Goda John in a raid in his home in Wisconsin, because basically they could have just literally sent the police a map. Honestly, the police didn't need one, but they may as well have just sent them one. In fact, they may as well have just been walking around with big stickers on their chest saying, we did it. Genuinely. Like I said, totally unsophisticated. At this point, they extradite them back to Springfield, and both of them are charged with really serious offences, with murder and felony armed criminal action. During the search of the property, they even find an envelope which contains a serrated knife and bloody latex glove. Yep, Goda John had actually decided that it was a good idea to send himself these items after the killing in Springfield. Now, on one level, you could say, well, does that show a level of sophistication? He basically wants to make sure that the murder weapon and the gloves with blood on are not actually at the crime scene. But also, it does make you think, is it a bit of a trophy? You know, why would you actually want that anywhere near you? It implicates you immediately. But nonetheless, like I said, we're not talking high-level sophistication and forensics here. So it's at this point that the police have arrested them. They actually make the announcement to the media, because people have been absolutely fraught. Remember, Gypsy's been abducted, potentially by somebody who wants her great harm. Her mother's dead. People are asking all these questions, and then suddenly they're saying, you know what? We've found her. She's safe, she's well. But actually, she isn't who you think she is. This girl, this child, this young teenager is actually an adult. And also, she doesn't even have any of the physical or mental health issues that her mother has claimed for all these years. Now, at that point, the public sentiment rapidly shifted. They had this sense of horror initially, that this disabled girl has been abducted, to suddenly realising that this young woman had endured a life of medical abuse. Now, those are the people who knew Gypsy and knew Dee Dee. They could not wrap their heads around it. They couldn't believe they'd been so easily taken in. And yet, ironically, how easily taken in were they? The doctors went ahead and did half the things that she asked for. There was a lot of reasons why you believe that Gypsy was ill. She looked the role, she played the role, she sounded like the role. Therefore, at the end of the day, people bought into a bias that this must be real. They presumed what Dee Dee had told them was genuine. After all, what's the idea about being a mother, and the philosophy of being a mother is you always want what is best for your child. And Dee Dee played that role perfectly. She executed that role absolutely accurately. She played this scenario where she dedicated her entire life to her seriously ill daughter. When in truth, her daughter was just a cash cow. And Dee Dee had been systematically abusing her daughter and profiting from it. Bear that in mind. Profiting from her daughter's abuse. Now, during the police interview, Goda John basically claimed that he'd gone to Springfield to collect Gypsy because Dee Dee had thrown her out of the house. He made no mention at all of killing Dee Dee. But the detective told him that Gypsy had actually told him everything. Now, she hadn't, but detectives are allowed to lie to try to get somebody to confess. It's not uncommon for these things to be said. You play one off against the other. So at this point, when he believes all is lost and Gypsy has confessed to their role within the murder, he tells them everything. And he changes his story at that point and says, you know what? Yeah, Gypsy asked me to kill her. It was the only way we could be together. I did it for Gypsy. He admitted to stabbing Dee Dee, and he also claimed he felt guilty about it because he said after he'd actually gone ahead and killed her, he and Gypsy talked about her mother, and Gypsy talked about what a good mum she'd been.
Okay. Because, and then the truth is, okay, I'll admit it, I did actually stab her mom. I will admit it.
I know. Okay.
The only reason I did it is because I did it for me and her. That's the real reason I did it. I would have never did it if it was not for me and her.
Okay. So you wouldn't have done it if somebody else would have asked?
No.
Okay.
There's no way I would have did it for anyone else.
Okay, so you just
I
did.
truly do worship her to the point there's nothing I want to do for her.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think you've proved that, right?
Yes.
I think that you've proved that you do what she asked you to do, if that's the case, if she did ask you.
Yeah, she did ask me.
Okay, and she asked you more than once? Did she ask you why you were here?
She asked me more than once because what happened was, at first she wanted, because the thing was is that she wanted to do it herself, but she was too, what's the word, not cautious, it's, I guess skittish is the word, want to actually do it.
Okay.
Because she couldn't live with herself doing it.
Okay.
And, as for me, I honestly to this day I still feel guilty about it.
Okay.
I do.
Right.
Because I learned so much about her mom after she told me and more about it after actually being able to live with her for a little while.
Right.
I actually realized how great of a mom she was.
Okay, so it kind of makes you feel a little guilty.
No. I feel a lot more guilt than that.
Okay. Okay.
Now, we can all agree that she'd been a terrible mother. Sorry. I don't want to sound very judgmental, but I am. She was a horrible bitch of a parent, without a doubt. But when you've just killed your mum, you've got your partner to do that, the little bit of guilt is going to set in. You're going to remember the good times because that's what shame does. It makes us concentrate on the negatives of ourselves and the positives of others. So it doesn't surprise me that Gypsy started to talk about her mother in a more positive context when it's too late. But for him, that shifts the paradigm of his understanding about the relationship and it's conflicting. He then goes on to describe in detail exactly how he carried out the attack. He's banged to rights. Full confession.
So when you're stabbing Dee, where is she at?
She's on her stomach.
On her stomach where? On the floor, in the bathtub, or somewhere different?
On her, on the, oh my gosh. I got them in mind. Where, oh, I got that 1 second.
You're fine. Take your time.
She was on the bed. Her bed.
Her bed. In her bedroom?
Yes.
Okay. So was she sleeping on her stomach or just laying there watching TV or?
Sleeping on her stomach.
Okay, so she's laying in her bed sleeping on her stomach. Is she covered up with covers or uncovered or?
It actually when I did it, it seemed like she had her, it was almost like a nightgown on it seemed like.
Okay.
And she barely even was covered at all.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it was easy access to her body.
Okay. So she didn't have a bunch of covers on her. It made it a lot easier
Yeah.
to do that. Okay. And so when she's laying there, where's the first place you decide to stab her?
And I just was in a random spot in the back.
In the back, just random.
Yes.
Do you know how many times you stabbed her?
4.
You stabbed her 4?
Yeah, 4 times.
Okay.
The 4th one, I felt it go into, I think it might have been her lungs.
Okay.
Because it was harder to get out.
Okay. Did it take one hand to get it out? 2 hands?
I had to yank it out
Okay.
with 1 hand.
Okay. So it did. So the others came out easy, but that one kind of came out harder.
Yep.
Okay. And so, You only stabbed her 4 times? Are you sure about that?
Well, as in stabbing, I stabbed her 4 times.
Okay.
But I did actually cut her one other time besides that.
Okay, where'd you
It was
cut her
on
at?
the back of her neck.
Okay. And did you use the same knife that you
Yep.
did the others with?
Yep.
Okay. And when you did the cross the back of the neck, did that even cause an injury, or did you see any blood or anything?
Yeah, she was bleeding.
Okay, she's bleeding. And so did she scream or holler, or
Yeah, she did.
what was she saying?
First she said help, and then she didn't recognize who I was. So she
Okay.
said, who are you? And then,
She said, "Who are you?"
yeah.
Okay. And she didn't recognize who you are, and she says help, and then what does she say?
And then she called up for Gypsy, but Gypsy didn't do anything.
Okay. She hollered for Gypsy.
Yes.
Did she holler for Gypsy once, twice, 5 times,
3 times.
3 times? And what was she saying? Can you tell me how she said it?
She pretty much yelped it.
Yelped it?
It's like, Gypsy.
Okay.
Yeah, she was loud.
And what did you do when she did that?
It didn't stop me from keep on going.
Okay. You just kept stabbing her?
Yeah.
Okay.
We get to July 2015. At this point, they investigate Gypsy's medical history, and they see that this lifetime of medical abuse is real. It's all confirmed. She's subsequently, at this point, offered a plea deal, and she accepts it. You know, she pleads guilty to her mother's second-degree murder, and Gypsy ends up getting sentenced to 10 years in prison. During that first year being incarcerated, she put on 14 pounds. Now that's the opposite to most prisoners. That's how undernourished she was. She's currently incarcerated at Chillicothe Correctional Centre, Livingston County, Missouri. And I don't know how a lot of you feel about that. It'll be really interesting to find out your perception and perspectives on that incarceration. Then we get to November 2018. We've got Goda John's trial. Commences in Greene County, Missouri. The psychiatric evaluation that they actually did on him, well, it revealed quite a lot. So first of all, it establishes that he's got an IQ of 82. He's also autistic. 82 is low. He's really low IQ level there. And we have to think about the impact that that kind of intelligence deficit is going to have on his actions, along with the fact that he has an extra complexity, which is his autism. Now, his defence team, they didn't deny for 1 minute that Goda John killed Dee Dee. He'd admitted it. It was clear. The forensic evidence was very weighty. They weren't going to try to wheedle a way out of that. But they said, yeah, he did do this, absolutely 100%, but that was under the influence and instruction of Gypsy. It was Gypsy who formulated the plan. It was Gypsy who provided him with the murder weapon. Yes, he did it, but he loved her. He was compliant. He was going ahead and doing what she wanted. His intoxication and infatuation with Gypsy was enough to mean that he carried out a despicable action to protect her, to free her so that they could have the future together. Furthermore, the defence claimed that Goda John didn't have the mental capacity to possess the required intent for murder because of his autism. So they argued that the first-degree murder charge was not appropriate. And I do feel when you listen to that description, and you know what I'm like on here, you know, when it comes down to the defence, a lot of times I'm like, that's a terrible defence. You may as well just throw them in and say, I have nothing to say. Nothing to say, just give them the sentence, please. Or the alternative is they go in and go, okay, they did it, but they really didn't mean to, and they're really sorry, can we not have first degree, and so on and so forth. But in this case, I genuinely feel the defence have got some pretty strong reasoning behind their suggestion that they don't feel it's first degree murder. Now the prosecution, of course, they're going to come down hard. They said that Goda John's actions hadn't been aimed at saving Gypsy at all. They said they were purely self-centred. He wanted Gypsy, Dee Dee was in his way, and as far as he was concerned, clearing that way was all that mattered to him. Now, interestingly, Gypsy testified at Goda John's trial. She detailed the illnesses her mother had claimed she'd suffered from to the court.
What illnesses did you believe you had?
Cancer, muscular dystrophy. I needed glasses. I needed hearing aids. Seizure disorder. And I can't remember what else.
And when did you figure out that you weren't actually sick?
I started to piece things together when I was about 19 years old. Then I didn't understand the full extent of how healthy I was until after I got arrested.
So even at the time, even as of June of 2015, you still believed you had some of the illnesses?
Yes, sir.
And she admitted, it had been my idea to kill my mother. It had been me talking John into doing it. I wanted to be free of her. She was holding me back. She'd abused me all these years. And then she went on to admit that she'd actually supplied John with the murder weapon, with the gloves, because she didn't feel that she could go through with it. So Gypsy admitted that she was the main motivation behind the killing. And don't get me wrong, at no point are we excusing the actions of John. It's absolutely heinous and horrific, despicable and diabolical. There are always other options. But nonetheless, the argument that the prosecution are putting forward is none of that matters. What matters is he went ahead and murdered this woman, and as far as we are concerned, he did that for one intention, to have the girl that he wanted to spend his time and sexual life with. And it's a difficult one. If you're on a jury thinking about those arguments, it's conflicting, right? It's really conflicting. Because on one hand, the defense are putting up a strong argument, very low IQ, also has an autism classification, also high degree of manipulation, as admitted in court, by the girl who essentially orchestrated this plan. And there's the background regarding Dee Dee, this manipulative, horrific human being who all but destroyed an entire lifetime for Gypsy. So arguably, it's a conflicting situation.
At some point, you decided to kill your mother, is that correct?
Yes.
When was that?
Thoughts of it started a year prior to the murder actually happening.
Whose idea was it to kill your mother?
Mine.
Why did you want to kill your mother?
Because I wanted to be free of her hold on me.
Did you and Nick ever talk about this?
Yes,
Who initially brought up killing your mother?
I did.
Why not just tell somebody rather than kill your mother? Why was that not an option?
I truly didn't believe that nobody would believe me if I told anyone. My mother had legal documents in place saying that I was incompetent, and I thought that meant that if I went to anyone, the police, or told anyone, she would just have them convinced that I was making everything up.
There's a 4-day trial, 2 hours of deliberation. And after they go away and deliberate, the jury find John guilty of first-degree murder. Prior to the sentencing, the judge asks if he'd got anything he wanted to say. John stated he'd done what he'd done for love. He'd never had any female attention or connection before. He asked the judge for some kind of mercy, and he was subsequently sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in February 2019. That's the automatic sentence for the offence, where the death penalty isn't sought. And also, he got a concurrent 25-year sentence relating to the charge of armed criminal action. So he remains incarcerated at the Potosi Correctional Center, Washington County, Missouri. Now, Gypsy, on the other hand, she's going to be eligible for parole in December 2023. I'm recording this in February 2023. She's getting out soon. She claims, really sadly, but really powerfully and poignantly, to have felt more free during her incarceration than any other time of her life. What an indictment of the horrors she endured with that mother. And it transpires that the only physical problem that Gypsy actually had was a slightly lazy eye. So she's got the vision in one eye is better than in the other. Otherwise, she is 100% healthy and 100% intelligent as well. There is nothing developmentally delayed about this young woman. Now, whilst it was never officially diagnosed because Dee Dee's died before anybody got an opportunity to diagnose her, it seems that Gypsy was without a doubt a victim of Munchausen by proxy. This is also known as factitious disorder. So this is a mental disorder and a form of child abuse. So the parent exaggerates or causes or makes up illnesses for a child that isn't actually sick. And there are lots of theories as to why somebody may do this. And I'll be honest with you, there are people out there who are psychiatrists and psychologists who just genuinely don't believe it exists. They just think, you know, a person is malevolent, abusive, and could not care less about the person they're harming as long as it feeds their own needs. In this case, attention, for example. But for those individuals who believe that factitious disorder does exist, they think there are a group of motivations that can lead the person to act that way. So to gain sympathy, to gain attention, money, clearly financial interest in this. And in Dee Dee's case, we can say, well, she definitely got all of those things. She got lots of sympathy, loads of attention, and of course, a lot of money, including a house. I mean, you can't get more successful than that, can you? Forget the trips to Disney. She got a pink friggin' house. She succeeded where she really put the effort in, didn't she? So Gypsy's fictional ailments paid well. And like I said, she really relished that attention that she got. She liked the special treatment they brought. But the other thing is, there's a level of possession where she treated Gypsy, isn't there? She saw her as an object for her disposal, for her use, for her abuse. Gypsy wasn't a human being. She liked controlling every single aspect of her life. She was a puppet. It's as simple as that. And the fact that she kept her in that really childlike state, even going so far as to lie about her age and to create a fraudulent birth certificate, this is a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And if you think about it, in more than the 20 years that Gypsy was treated, there was only one medical individual, a professional who suspected that Gypsy was a victim of Munchausen by proxy. A guy called Bernardo Flanterstein. He was basically a pediatric neurologist. But when he came forward and was like, there is something seriously wrong with what's going on with the treatment of this kid, he's basically advised by colleagues to be careful because Dee Dee and Gypsy had this local celebrity status. So Flanterstein decided that he wasn't going to actually speak to social services about that because of that pressure, which is awful. At the end of the day, you're a professional. Go ahead and speak your truth, risk offending. You might just save somebody. In this case, if those interventions had taken place, I'm clearly not blaming that person. Although there is certain blame on the professionals that he was speaking to who tried to subdue that information, because Dee Dee died. She wouldn't have died if there'd been intervention. And chain of causation says that if those connections had been made and if those reports had been filed, we would not be talking about this right now. So it's really important to acknowledge the failures by those around that person who wanted to speak out but was told, be quiet. If you speak out, there'll be repercussions. And when you are going against the grain, when you are pushing back on the tide, believe me, it's an incredibly scary thing to do and psychologically something that very few have the backbone and resilience to actually go ahead and do. Dee Dee's family. What can I say about them when she died? Heartbroken? No, they weren't. Not even a bit. Not heartbroken. And when I describe this, I think if you're ever looking to explore a physical reaction to denote an emotional connection or lack of connection, I'm about to describe it. So when her father and stepmother received Dee Dee's ashes, they flushed them down the toilet. Yeah. I imagine they took great pleasure in doing that. Down where you belong, literally. This is a really extraordinary case. It's really tragic. I'm going to be honest. I think it's really harsh that Gypsy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She had been an abuse victim for 20 years in plain sight. She's utterly failed by the medical profession on every single level. The fact that she's flourished in prison is testament to how horrific her experience was and her existence was. To actually think that your life is so awful that when you're incarcerated, you're happier. And I'll additionalize this because I think it is really harsh that Goda John was found guilty of first-degree murder. I think he should have been found guilty and sentenced, but I think he should have been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter or second-degree murder. Look, Gypsy admitted that she came up with the plan to murder her mum. She asked Goda John to do it. She supplied him with the murder weapon. On his part, Goda John, without a doubt, seems to have been very easily led. In his eyes, he did do it for love. Doesn't matter how ill-conceived it is and how wrong it is, he did it for love. Now, autism, of course, it does not make somebody a violent person at all. But come on, it must play a part in how someone interprets the world and acts accordingly. He wanted to be with her, he wanted to protect her. And in that literal understanding of the situation, he wanted to prove his love to her, and he did in the most awful way, and he's definitely guilty. But is he guilty of first-degree murder of such an abusive, horrific human being who basically probably killed her own mother, tried to kill her own stepmother, certainly couldn't have cared less if her daughter had died, was highly abusive, caused a situation where she was never allowed to have any freedom, and finally Gypsy snaps, enrolls the person that is infatuated with her, and he goes ahead and does it for love. I'm not validating or excusing his behaviour. Like I said, he definitely deserves to go to prison. But life without parole, when he genuinely was love's executioner to some degree in this situation, his actions caused the one thing that he wanted to just disintegrate. He lost Gypsy. He lost his freedom. But like I said, some of you may not agree with what I'm saying, but I truly believe this. I don't think those sentences are acceptable or fair. Without a doubt, the person in this case who is the biggest victim is Gypsy. And I feel that I have every sympathy and empathy with what she felt, and even to some degree, how she acted, though I wish she hadn't acted this way. But I feel that it's unfair that she gets to be freed by the end of this year, whilst Goda John's going to die in prison. And he still professes his love for her to this day. Now, those feelings are not reciprocated by Gypsy. She says that she realises on reflection that she was infatuated, she wasn't in love, and I completely understand her viewpoint. But again, that means that Goda John is the biggest loser in this situation. And again, I'm saying, I think both those sentences are harsh. I think Gypsy was punished enough. I genuinely do. She would never have acted that way without being put in a position where she was so trapped, so broken by a beast, because her mother was a beast. Make no doubt of that. And the reality is, because of that, she felt that she had to have that beast slaughtered. Like people who are coercively controlled in relationships, and then one day they murder their husband or they kill the husband. And people say, well, that's extreme. You could just have left. You could have asked for help. But that's not how you see the controller, not how you see psychologically the dominant party. You think they'll never escape. I'll never escape. The only way I'll escape if they're not breathing. And we see this play out time and time again. So extreme is the reaction, but extreme is the feeling that causes the fear of not acting that way. A life of being trapped forever. Both the sentences, as I said, I find harsh. Now, once Gypsy is actually released, ideally and hopefully she'll get multi-agency support, she'll get therapy, because her only role model in life was a seriously flawed, sociopathic individual, without a doubt. But that was the same person who was supposed to be a primary caregiver. And you've got to think about the foundational problems that's going to cause for Gypsy when she's thinking about positive relationships for the rest of her life. Now, Munchausen's by proxy is considered to be incredibly rare, incredibly rare. Like I said, some people don't even believe it exists, but the cases that are recorded are tiny. And out of those cases that have been recorded, Gypsy's case is considered to be the only instance of where a child has killed their abuser. So she is a really, really unique case, because all of that internalized pain, emotional distress, physical abuse, it became rageful. And also, it became despondent to the reality of consequences. And she used that to project power over the individual, preventing her from having a life that she desired, moreover, that she deserved. And both parties, both her and he, have to live for the rest of their lives knowing that they killed Dee Dee. But I would imagine for both parties, the weighing up of their conscience can survive that action because of the heinous abuse that Gypsy had to endure. I would be so interested to know whether you, like me, feel that the sentences were inappropriate. He should definitely be in prison, no doubt. But first-degree murder? She stood on that stand and took responsibility for every single part of the planning. She was the person who provided the murder weapon. She was the person who gave him the gloves. She was the person who wanted him to free her. And he did that. And he deserves to go to prison for a long time. For life without parole? And do you think Gypsy deserved any time inside? Because truthfully, I think actually she's benefited from it on one level. She's been freer in prison than she was ever on the outside with her mother. But with respect, she also has lost a long period of her life that was already stolen from her. And yes, she needed to be punished, but what risk did she really pose to the general public? And that's what prison often has to ask the question about. Was her incarceration necessary to that degree, or could it have been handled externally, where she'd have been given a chance to thrive in the community, living with her father, for example? Let me know your thoughts. It's been a really complex case. It's been a long case, but I wanted to cover it thoroughly. And like I said, Dee Dee died. We can't forget that, not for a moment. But she also killed Gypsy for so many years. She really did. She denied her life. She denied her freedom. She denied her flourishing. She was willing to do that to her own daughter. That's why the family has no love lost where her death is concerned. Please let me know whether you've enjoyed listening to these details. If you know any more about this, let me know. Let me know your thoughts and feelings. If you want to join me again, please do. I release my content on a Wednesday and a Sunday religiously. Crime consistency is my theme. If you fancy coming and seeing me at the Serial Killer Next Door tour, I am all over the UK this year, literally all over the UK. I am meeting myself coming backwards. Prepare for my filming to be in different places because I'm going to be in hotels all over the country. Until then, take care, my lovelies. Be safe.